It was 8:14 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor, reviewing a commercial portfolio worth $60 million. When my phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, I picked it up, expecting a client or a compliance officer. Instead, it was a text message from my mother. Patricia. It didn't say hello. It didn't ask how I was. It was just 2 sentences that would cost her everything she owned. We no longer trust you. The locks have been changed. I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. I didn't feel a single tear prick my eyes. I simply opened the smart home app on my phone, the one connected to the historic Newport estate that I had been paying the mortgage on for 4 years. I tried to view the front door camera. A red banner flashed across the screen. Access denied. User privileges revoked by admin. They hadn't just locked me out of my childhood home. They had locked me out of my own investment. Before I tell you exactly how much that house cost me, down to the cent, drop a comment below. Where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? I want to see how far this story travels, to understand why I didn't scream. You have to understand what I do for a living. I am a commercial asset manager. I don't deal in feelings. I deal in leverage, liabilities, and return on investment. If a building is bleeding money, I cut it loose. If a tenant breaches contract, I evict them. I am precise. I am cold. And I am very, very expensive. But for 32 years, I was also a fool. My family was the only bad asset I refused to liquidate. The dynamic was simple. I was the wallet. And my younger sister, Brittany, was the talent. Brittany is 28 years old, and she describes herself as a lifestyle curator, which is a polite way of saying she takes photos of brunch for an audience of 3,000 bots. She is fragile. She is creative. She needs space to breathe. I am rigid. I am corporate. I exist to provide that space. Every month, $4,200 left my account for the mortgage on the Newport house. Then there were the country club dues. Because my father, Richard, insisted that business deals happen on the golf course, even though he hadn't closed a deal since 1998. Then there were Brittany's expenses. Her mental health trips to Tulum. Her wardrobe updates. Her branding consultants. I paid it all. For years, I told myself I was doing it because I was the strong one. I told myself I was keeping the family legacy alive. But staring at that access denied screen, in the silence of my office, a different truth settled in my gut. It was a truth I had been running from my entire adult life. I wasn't paying for a house. I was paying rent. I was paying a monthly subscription fee for their affection. I had convinced myself that if I just wrote enough checks, if I solved enough problems, if I kept the lights on and the champagne flowing, they would eventually look at me the way they looked at Brittany. I thought I was buying loyalty. But you cannot buy equity in people who only see you as a utility. I wasn't their daughter. I was their staff. And the thing about staff is, you can fire them whenever you want. You just have to make sure you don't need their money anymore. I set my phone down on the desk. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text my sister. I swiveled my chair toward my dual monitors and opened a new spreadsheet. If they wanted to treat this relationship like a business transaction, and fine, I would give them the most thorough audit of their lives. The notification popped up on my private Instagram feed 10 minutes later. It was a photo of Brittany, standing on the front porch of the Newport estate, my porch, holding a bottle of champagne and a thick stack of papers. The caption read, "So incredibly blessed. Mom and Dad just officially gifted me the deed to the Newport house. Finally. A forever home for my future babies." I zoomed in on the document in her hand. It was a quitclaim deed. And right there, on the bottom line, was a signature that looked remarkably like mine. If I had signed it while suffering a seizure, They hadn't just changed the locks. They had forged my signature to transfer a $600,000 asset to a woman whose credit score was lower than her daily calorie count. I didn't call the police. That would be too messy. Too emotional. Instead, I went to work. For the next 48 hours. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I ran a forensic audit on my own parents. I pulled their credit reports. I accessed the shared cloud drive they forgot I paid for. I cross-referenced 4 years of bank statements against local casino records. I didn't just find the fraud, I found the motive. My father hadn't just retired, he had gambled away his pension. They weren't gifting the house to Brittany out of love. They were leveraging the equity to take out a high-risk loan to cover $40,000 in baccarat debt. They needed the house in Brittany's name because my credit was locked down tight. And they knew I would never approve a second mortgage. But the numbers weren't the worst part. The worst part was the group chat. I found it on an old iPad I had bought for my mother 3 Christmases ago. It was still synced to her iMessage. The chat was titled The Inner Circle. It included my parents, Brittany, and 3 of my aunts. I scrolled back to the date of the deed transfer. My mother wrote, "We had to do it. Waverly is unstable. You know how she gets with money. She's financially abusive." My aunt replied, "Is she off her meds again?" My mother answered, "We think so. We had to take the house to protect the family assets before she spiraled. Besides, Brittany is settling down. She needs a nest." Waverly. Well, she's married to her job. What does a cold career woman need with a 4-bedroom house? She's barren by choice. I stared at the screen. The blue light, reflected in my glasses. They had built an entire narrative to justify their theft. To them, I wasn't just a bank. I was a defective product. My success wasn't an achievement, it was a symptom of my lack of traditional value. They stripped me of my property, not just because they were greedy, but because they believed I didn't deserve a home as much as the sister who might one day give them grandchildren. I didn't feel hurt. I felt clarified. Hurt is what you feel when you lose something real. This was just a bad investment, finally revealing its true yield. I saved every screenshot. I downloaded every bank statement. I compiled the digital footprint of their felony into a single, encrypted file. I closed my laptop. The audit was complete. Now, I just needed a venue to present the findings. I went radio silent for 2 weeks. I didn't answer my mother's calls. I didn't like Brittany's posts. I let the silence stretch and warp until it convinced them of the one thing they desperately wanted to believe. That I was defeated. They interpreted my lack of response as shame. They assumed their gaslighting had worked. That I accepted the narrative that I was unstable and difficult. And that I was currently licking my wounds in my sterile high-rise apartment. Their arrogance was their fatal error. On a Thursday, the invitation arrived at my office. It was heavy cardstock, cream-colored with gold foil lettering. "Richard and Patricia cordially invite you to their Ruby anniversary celebration." The venue was a rented historic mansion in Newport, just 3 miles down the coast from the house they had stolen. The guest list included everyone. The country club set, Brittany's influencer friends, the extended family, who had been told I was mentally unwell, and, crucially, Grandma Eleanor. Grandma Eleanor was the matriarch. She controlled the family trust. The only reason my parents maintained their lifestyle while gambling away their own cash. She was 80 years old, sharp as a tack, and obsessed with reputation. They hadn't invited me because they wanted me there. They invited me because Grandma Eleanor would ask questions if I wasn't. They needed me to show up, sit quietly in the corner, and perform the role of the dutiful, slightly unstable daughter to validate their happy family tableau. They needed me to legitimize the lie. I ran my thumb over the gold foil. It felt expensive. It felt like a trap. But they forgot one thing. When you invite an auditor to a party, they bring the books. I pulled out my RSVP card. I filled it out in black ink. Accepts with pleasure. Then I called my printer. I need a rush order. I said. 211 pages. High gloss finish. Bound in Italian leather. It needs to look like a commemorative photo album. What's the title on the spine? The printer asked. I looked at the forged deed on my screen. The master ledger. I said, I wasn't going to that party to make a scene. I wasn't going to flip tables or throw wine. I was going to do exactly what I did best. I was going to give a presentation. The mansion was exactly what they wanted. A stage set for a life they couldn't afford. It was a sprawling, Gilded Age estate overlooking the Atlantic. Rented for $12,000 a night. Money they had likely borrowed from a high-interest lender based on the equity they had just stolen from me. I arrived precisely at 7. I wasn't wearing the beige blend-in cardigan my mother usually critiqued. I was wearing a sharp, black architectural suit and 4-inch stilettos. I didn't look like a daughter coming to celebrate. I looked like a CEO coming to liquidate a subsidiary. In my hand, I carried the leather-bound book. It was heavy. Substantial. The weight of it felt like a weapon. The room was filled with the specific kind of Newport crowd my parents desperately courted. People who wore boat shoes ironically and had buildings named after their grandfathers. Brittany was in the center of it all, holding a ring light, live streaming to her followers. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal, playing the role of the innocent heiress perfectly. Waverly, my mother, Patricia, chirped when she saw me. Her smile was tight, a mixture of relief and warning. You made it. We were worried you might be having one of your episodes. She said it loud enough for the 3 women next to her to hear. The whisper campaign in action. They were preempting any outburst I might have by framing it as mental instability. I wouldn't miss it, I said, my voice flat. I brought a gift. I walked past her and placed the leather book on the gift table, right next to a silver ice bucket. It looked elegant. It looked expensive. It hid its contents perfectly among the Tiffany boxes and crystal vases. We sat for dinner. The pacing was excruciating. I watched them eat the crab cakes I knew they couldn't pay for. I watched my father, Richard, slap backs and pour vintage wine, playing the benevolent patriarch. It was a masterclass in fraud. Then came the speeches. My father stood up, clinking a spoon against his crystal glass. The room hushed. Brittany pointed her phone camera at him, ensuring her 3,000 followers wouldn't miss the moment. 40 years, he began, his voice thick with practiced emotion. 40 years of building a legacy, not just of wealth, but of values. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the heavy hitters. The investors, the people whose approval he craved like oxygen. We have made sacrifices, he continued. Patricia and I have given everything to ensure our daughters have a foundation. And yes, it hasn't always been easy. He turned his gaze to me. His eyes were heavy with a performative pity that made my skin crawl. Waverly, we know you've struggled to find your way. We know the pressure of the corporate world has been difficult for your stability. But we love you. We always will. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. Poor Waverly. The unstable one. The burden. He was publicly rewriting history, turning my competence into pathology. He turned to Brittany, beaming. But tonight, we celebrate the future. We are so proud to have passed the torch and the deed to our Newport home. To Brittany, she understands that a house isn't just an asset. It's a home for future generations. To Brittany, the room echoed. They drank the champagne. They applauded the theft. They smiled at the lie. I didn't drink. I checked my watch. The audit was complete. It was time to present the findings. I stood up. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't wait for the applause to die down. The scrape of my chair against the hardwood floor was loud, deliberate, cutting through the murmurs of approval like a gunshot. I'd like to say a few words, I said. My father's smile faltered, the corners of his mouth twitching. Waverly. Honey? Maybe now isn't the time. It will only take a moment, I said. I walked past him, my heels clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor. I moved to the front of the room, where a laptop sat connected to the projector, currently displaying a sepia-toned photo of my parents' wedding day. I pulled the HDMI cable from the laptop and plugged it directly into my phone. The screen flickered. The image of marital bliss vanished into static for a heartbeat. Then, a new image snapped into focus. It was a high-resolution PDF, magnified to 10 feet tall. It was the quitclaim deed. This, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without a tremor, is the document transferring the Newport property to Brittany. The room went quiet. Brittany lowered her phone, her brow furrowing in confusion. The guests squinted at the legal text. I swiped. And this, I continued, is the metadata from the electronic signature. A new slide appeared. It showed a timestamp, an IP address, and a geolocation map. As you can see, the IP address traces back to a computer in this very house. Signed at 10:14 a.m. on Tuesday. At that exact moment, I was physically located in my office in Boston, under security surveillance. I looked directly at my father. That is called forgery. Waverly. Stop this. My mother hissed. Standing up so abruptly, her chair tipped over. She turned to the guests, her voice high and frantic. She's having an episode. Please. Everyone. Just ignore her. She's not well. She was playing the card she had prepped them for. The unstable daughter. The hysteric. I swiped again. This, I said, pointing to the screen, is a screenshot of the family group chat from 3 weeks ago. The text bubbles were massive. Undeniable. The font was crisp. My mother wrote, "We had to take the house. The old bat, Grandma Eleanor, is threatening to cut us off if we don't show assets. We'll just tell everyone Waverly is off her meds again. She's just the ATM anyway." A gasp sucked the air out of the room. It started in the front row and rippled backward. I looked over at Grandma Eleanor. She was sitting very still in her high-backed chair. Her hand was gripping the silver head of her cane so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes were locked on the screen, reading the words her own son had written about her. The old bat. I swiped again. And this, I said, is the ledger. The screen filled with a spreadsheet. It was beautiful in its brutality. It was a forensic accounting of the last 4 years. Row 1. Mortgage payments. Row 2. Country club dues. Row 10. Loan for Richard's gambling debt. Labeled as business investment. Row 20. Mental health retreat for Brittany. The Aspen ski trip. The numbers scrolled. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. You could hear the ice melting in the silver buckets. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. The final cell at the bottom was highlighted in red. It loomed over the room. Total. $642,890.12. I unplugged my phone. The screen went black. I walked over to the gift table. I picked up the heavy leather book I had arrived with. I walked back to my father, who was now pale, sweat beading on his forehead, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. "You didn't transfer a deed, Richard," I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. "You committed felony fraud, wire fraud, identity theft." I dropped the book on the table in front of him. It landed with a heavy, final thud that echoed off the high ceilings. "This is the bill," I said. "It is due in 24 hours. If it is not paid in full..." I hand the digital copy to the district attorney. My father looked at the book. He looked at the room full of people. His investors, his friends, his social ladder, who now knew he was a fraud. He looked at me, waiting for me to crack, to cry, to give him an opening to manipulate the narrative back to his favor. I gave him nothing but a balance sheet. "You stole from my granddaughter?" The voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. Grandma Eleanor stood up. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her son. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "Mother, please," my father stammered, reaching out a hand. "She's confusing things. It's complicated." I saw the texts. "Richard," Eleanor said. The old bat saw the texts. She turned to her personal assistant, who was standing in the shadows near the kitchen door. "Freeze the trust," she commanded. "Cut them off. Everything. The cards. The stipends. The access. Effective immediately." Brittany screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was the short, sharp sound of a lifestyle evaporating. She looked from her phone to her parents, realizing the money tap had just been welded shut. "Grandma." "No," Brittany wailed. "You can't do that." "I just did," Eleanor said. She looked at me, gave a single, sharp nod of respect, and then turned her back on them. I didn't stay to watch them beg. My business here was concluded. I walked toward the exit. The guests parted like the Red Sea, staring at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I wasn't the unstable daughter anymore. I was the person who had just leveled the room with a spreadsheet. I reached for the heavy oak door handle. "Ms. Sterling." "Wait." I turned. A man in a suit was running toward me. It was Mr. Henderson, my parents' lawyer and a longtime family friend. He looked terrified. He knew exactly what a felony fraud charge would do to his own reputation if he was found to be complicit. He stopped in front of me. Breathless. "Please," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "There's no need for the police. We can settle this right now." He pulled out a checkbook. His hands were shaking. "I manage their liquid assets," he said. "They have an emergency fund. It was supposed to be for, well, it doesn't matter." He wrote the check. He didn't negotiate. He didn't ask for a discount. He wrote it for exactly $642,890.12. He tore it out and handed it to me. "Please," he said. "Just take it and go." I looked at the check. It was valid. It represented the liquidation of their last safety net. It was everything they had left. I folded it and put it in my blazer pocket. "Transaction complete," I said. I walked out into the cool night air. The valet brought my car around. I got in, tossed the check onto the passenger seat, and drove toward the Newport Bridge. My phone started buzzing. Apologies from aunts who had ignored me for years. A frantic text from Brittany begging me to talk to Grandma. A voicemail from my mother, weeping. I didn't listen to it. I rolled down the window and threw the phone out. It bounced once on the asphalt and shattered. As I drove over the bridge, seeing the lights of the harbor reflect on the black water, I realized something. My parents hadn't just lost their money. They had lost their mask. Without my funding, and without Grandma's protection, they were exposed. The social circle they worshipped would cannibalize them by morning. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like salt and gasoline. I wasn't happy. Happiness is a fleeting emotion. I was solvent. I was secure. And for the first time in 32 years, I was free. I didn't lose a family that night. I lost a liability. If you've ever had to audit your own heart just to survive, share this story. Let's remind the world that sometimes the price of freedom is exact change.